I love this quote, and this is a quote, real quote from a real kid about permanency. They're always talking about this permanency stuff. You know, social workers and lawyers, always using these big social work terms to talk about simple things. One day, one of them finally described what she meant by permanency. After I listened to her description, which was the first time anyone told me what the term meant, I said, oh, that's what you mean? Yeah, I want permanency in my life. I don't think I ever had it. When can I get it? You know, kids don't use that term, and neither do parents. Permanence is about connection, right? So if we use terms like connection with somebody, or would you like to have somebody who's important to you in your life for the rest of your life, and I'll frequently hear people saying, you know, somebody to go to on Thanksgiving, somebody to celebrate your birthday with. Those are really important events for kids, right? There's nothing worse than working in a residential program and you have the 5 kids that have nowhere to go, right? Literally nowhere to go on Christmas, on Thanksgiving, on their birthday. It's the saddest place you could be, right? So, you know, you realize that these kids need, who will they go to when they're 30 and 40, right? So I love, anyway, a pleasure to be here. I'm from New York. I'm a native New Yorker, but I've spent my whole career working in child welfare, actually. On January 24th, it will be 40 years that I have worked in child welfare. Thank you. And for the most part, they have been 40 great years. I mean, I've really enjoyed what I've done. I love child welfare. I don't regret for 1 second doing it. I didn't think when I started that I would do it. I was 18 years old and worked in a cottage for what we called in those days the baby boys, you know, 6 to 13-year-old children who lived in a cottage that was about as big as this stage. I'm not exaggerating, a little bit bigger maybe, but you know, 15 kids, one 18-year-old taking care of all these 15 kids for sometimes, you know, 48 hours straight. You wouldn't be able to do that anymore. And also you didn't get paid when you slept in, which I always thought was really interesting, you know. They would say, well, you're supposed to be sleeping. Yeah, but I get woken up 1,000 times a night by, you know, 6-year-olds who are wet in the bed and crying and, you know, doing all kinds of things. But that's where I started my career, and I really have done many things in that career since then. My most recent thing, besides teaching at the Hunter College School of Social Work, where I'm a professor, and my expertise is child welfare, not surprisingly, I ran the National Center for Foster Care and Permanency Planning. It had many different names: the National Research Center for Family-Centered Practice and Permanency Planning, the National Research Center for Family, I don't even remember the last iteration of it, and they stopped funding us last year. I'm sorry that George Shelton left, because it was probably under his administration that they stopped funding us, and I wanted to give him a word that what they funded currently ain't so hot. I wouldn't have been that impolite, but there was something that we did lots of work for 13 years in running around the country, and I worked with Juliana and folks here in Illinois, but working with lots of states and thinking about what would make for better permanency outcomes for young people. And I want to give you a couple of thoughts before I dive into this PowerPoint. We have some good time together, so I don't have to rush. You know, and I'm a New Yorker, so I kind of talk fast, but I'll try to slow it down. I think, I guess also I just want to give you a little context of who I am, because I think that makes a big difference in terms of kind of my thoughts behind it. In addition to working for 40 years in the field, I'm the adoptive parent of 3 young people who are not so young anymore. My daughter Leslie is 47, my son Ian is 26, and Travis is 23. I wanted to reflect back on these 2 slides that our previous speaker talked about, because that's, you know, kind of our issue, right? Is the percentage of children who exited to permanency within the 12 and 24 months below the national average, okay? We know that. Illinois' average is almost 17%. Nationally, it's about 36%, okay? To really pull that apart and decipher why, lots of reasons, right? And the way I entitled this is that it's not so important about where we've been, it's where you want to go. So the reality is, if we know that to be the fact, at this point in time, how do we want to change that? How do we want to think about that? How do we want to move that number forward? Kids in care for long periods of time. Again, this one really always concerns me, because you look at congregate care, APLA, they're your oldest kids, 6%, right? That's a big number. Right? But it's a comparable number in foster care, right? And then in kinship care, it's much less, all right? But APLA is a really concerning goal, 2% in adoption. These are the older kids. And the younger kids, we're seeing, you know, some bigger numbers here around adoption from foster care age 0 to 12. I think it's just a graphic illustration of some of the things that we want to kind of keep in mind to remember and to think about as things we want to kind of see some change in. One of the really nice things when we were preparing for this day is that Rachel had told me they used the National Research Center's definition of permanency, and I kept hoping it was the same one that I used. And it is, pretty much, which is great. I think the one I have may have another sentence or two, but I just wanted to kind of start there before we kind of start looking at each of the permanency pathways and talking a little bit about them. So it's a long definition, but I think when we were trying to think of what really permanency looked like, because it's such an amorphous term sometimes, especially for children, which we'll talk about later, and for families, but we wanted to really think about what does it really mean. So this is what we came up with. Permanence is not a philosophical process, a plan, or a foster care placement. And a lot of times we think, well, the kid's in a permanent place, so that's permanency, right? It's not. Nor is it intended to be a family relationship that lasts only until the child or youth turns 18. And again, I hear a lot of people say, well, you know, we guarantee that this kid will have permanency until they're 18 because they're living with this family, and then after that, you know, maybe the family will allow them to continue to live with them, or maybe they won't because they're living in a foster family. And the idea is that's not permanency either. So, and it's beyond 18 because in reality, young people need a permanent lifetime connection for their lifetime, not just until they're 18. Permanence is about locating and supporting a lifetime family. And we've always really believed in this concept of, you know, the permanence is about a family, however you define family. And here's the best definition of family I've ever known. It was by Ann Hartman and Joan Laird. A family is a family when two or more people decide to call themselves a family. Real broad. Nothing about blood, nothing about marriage. It's about just when you call yourself family. For young people in out-of-home placement, planning for permanence should begin at entry into care, which is, again, kind of flies in the face of this 90-day discharge. It really needs to start from the very beginning. This kid enters the system, what's their permanency plan? What are we working towards from day one? Not 60, 90, 120 days into it. And it should be child or youth driven. I think when young people can be part of the planning, you know, this nothing about me without me is phenomenal, right? Especially for teenagers. Teenagers should not have people just plan for them. They need to be part of the plan. Younger children, of course, however developmentally you can have them be part of the plan is always useful, but you know, it's kind of ridiculous. You're not going to engage a 2-year-old in their own planning, right? But you know, developmentally, I think at points you need to think about to be family focused, to be culturally competent, continuous, and approached with a high degree of urgency. And that urgency is really critical. We're getting older and we're moving along, and a week for us is nothing. A week for a kid is a long time. A month for a kid is a really long time. So the idea of how do we approach it with thoughtful urgency. Oh, and this is my little prayer, my very Catholic prayer for all of you, is, because I think it's really a nice little one. It says, and may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in the world so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. A good little charge to think about permanency, right? Because lots of people are saying, hey, it's never going to happen. It's really hard. You know, we're just where we need to be, and it's never going to change. And the reality is it needs to change, and it can change, and it will change.